Hey everyone, it's Tuesday, it's 3 o'clock. That means it's Tech Tuesday. Today I'm going to be doing the latest in broadband news curated just for you if you're a broadband operator. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Tech Tuesday. So again, today I'm going to be looking at some recent broadband stories that I think are of interest if you're a broadband operator. Maybe even if you're just a broadband user, you may find this interesting. So some of these stories. So here is a story about fiber and some choices that cable operators are going to have to make, possibly. It says here fiber could force cable to choose between ARPU and market share, ARPU being average revenue per user, and market share. Cable companies could soon find themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place as battles with fiber to the home providers for subscribers intensify, analysts at Cohen Equity Research warned. Recapping takeaways from a private fiber providers at its recent Fiber to the Home Symposium, Cohen noted cable's standard response to competition from these players has been to lock in subscribers with promotional rates. But participants in Cohen's conference pointed out that these rates are only available for new customers. That's in general, yes, and existing cable subscribers face substantially higher rates for broadband, but quite often those promotions are extended, right? So they will get customers on board with a low price, and then a year goes by, and then the price goes up. Then the cable customer knows they can call the cable operator and request a lower price, and quite often they will get that because the cable operator wants to hold on to that subscriber, right? Because it's very expensive to get a subscriber, and you want that paid over time so that you can then be profitable with that subscriber. And that's one of the reasons that cable operators and some others have these long-term commitments, because they are providing, a lot of times they'll provide the equipment, and they have to go out there and set everything up. So you got to recover that cost. So they have a long-term commitment. But a better option is to just provide good service, and that's what a lot of operators are doing now, especially if you're looking at some of these new 5G offerings from people like T-Mobile and Verizon and others. You can get 5G service, and they say they will waive the setup fee. They don't have any long-term commitments. A lot of times the equipment's included. So that's something that cable operators really need to be considering as they look to the future. So they're saying here that this could be a risk for them. The firm added two companies. Allo and Ziply Fiber reported penetration rates are pacing significantly faster than expected, hitting 20 to 30% in the first year. As the industry matures, the private fiber-to-the-home operators see terminal market shares approaching the natural 50-50 split with cable, with the better operator and customer experience perhaps winning out by a few points, percentage points, Cohen's team wrote. So in other words, I guess where these guys are installing fiber, they're starting to see maybe a 50-50 split on the share where they do have that service. New Street Research recently predicted that with help from government subsidies, fiber will pass around 80% of cable homes by 2030. Cable also faces pressure from fixed wireless broadband, which NSR forecast would rake in 2.4 million net additions in 2022 compared to cable's 1.5 million and fiber's 1.9 million. So you can see right there, they're forecasting that fixed wireless broadband, most likely 5G service, most likely mid-band 5G from people like T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, that they're going to be putting out possibly 2.4 million net additions. And that's going to overtake what you see from cable and fiber there. NSR's analysis concluded broadband pricing will remain robust in markets that have 1 or 2 gigabit capable providers, but warned a threat to pricing occurs when a 3rd gigabit capable provider enters the market. By 2030, NSR forecasts 83% of markets will have either 1 or 2 gigabit providers, while 15% will have 3 or more. So they're expecting big changes there as far as speed goes. It added higher build costs stemming from inflation and supply chain constraints could help ensure ARPU remains resilient across the broadband industry. So that will certainly significantly impact the ability of competitors to overbuild. Right now, there's going to be a lot of money out there. There's some out there now, obviously, through some of the federal programs like ARPA and RDOF and USDA Reconnect. There's money that's coming sometime in 2023 probably from the bipartisan infrastructure law, but that's future money. And of course you've got long lead times on things. You got like a year lead time on fiber, and then you've got 6 months to a year on fiber equipment and other types of equipment. So all of this is going to really impact the ability for overbuilding in certain areas. Unless people have already got the fiber, in their hands and the equipment in their hands. And of course, with these new, with the federal funds, those are all supposed to be and will be directed at unserved and underserved areas. So if you've got a cable operator out there that's providing something better than 100 by 20, you're not going to be seeing a lot of overbuilding from federal dollars. That would take a lot of time. We'd have to run out of unserved and underserved areas before the Ntca is going to allocate money to those already served areas. So that will impact that as well. Another story kind of related up here. Analysts think copper is likely to linger in the U.S. despite the fiber frenzy. And this goes for both HFC, hybrid fiber coax plant for cable operators, as well as DSL operators. And that's specifically what this is talking about here. AT&T and Verizon talked up copper retirement plans at their respective Investor Day events last month. Sorry, I was going to put on a chat here to see if any bumps. And there we go. But analysts told Fierce the technology is likely to stick around in the U.S. at least until the end of the decade. That's in part because copper is deeply entrenched in the country. Part of the problem is the sheer scale of the transition. NSR's Blair Levin pointed out in a separate note, Verizon still has approximately 12 million locations served with copper. Meanwhile, the team at MoffettNathanson noted copper subscribers account for around 60% of AT&T's consumer wireline business. There's still a lot of copper out there at these large providers, and they do have plans to turn that into fiber, but it sounds like it may take some time. Operators like AT&T, Frontier Communications, Lumen Technologies, and Brightspeed, assuming their acquisition of assets from Lumen is approved later this year, have all unveiled plans for major fiber deployments. But Del Oro Group VP Jeff Hainan told Fierce that these won't come fast enough or cover enough ground to spell the end of copper before the decade is out. He noted Del Oro is forecasting that by 2026 there will still be 400,000 DSL CPE units and around 130,000 new ports shipped in North America, which will be used for copper network maintenance. So they'll still be maintaining that fiber network and still be, having these ports shipped for existing networks. All these operators have plans to overbuild with fiber, but it's going to be around. It's going to be around until the end of the decade. The thing is, you can't build out fiber that fast, he explained. When you're doing fiber, you've got far more labor and permitting that can extend the timeline. So in the meantime, you've got to continue to rely on copper. If operators weren't constrained by limitations on the fiber itself, conduit, electronics, and labor, then Hainan said it might be possible that the U.S. could see the end of copper before the decade is out, but with the way things currently stand, that's not likely. So again, things like supply chain issues are going to impact this. And this is really a risk for telephone operators or telecom operators in these areas that have DSL, because as cable stands, they already are, like I say, they're already providing faster service than DSL in areas where they have HFC plant. They can make changes to their HFC plant. They can do some things moving towards DOCSIS 3.1 if they don't have it. They can do some remote PHY, remote MAC-PHY kinds of deployments, which I'll talk about here in just a minute with an Alaska provider. They can do high splits. They can do lots of things to really increase the spectrum in their plant. They can move off of QAM video. We'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So there's lots of things that cable operators can do with the existing HFC plant and the existing coax that they've got in the ground, where they don't need to worry about it as much as these telecom operators need to worry where they've got DSL, because again, they're going to have issues upgrading DSL in all these places. A lot of them are going to also have to determine, am I going to put fiber in greenfield areas where, if they're getting funds, let's say federal funds, they want to put fiber out there, or am I going to overbuild my existing DSL plant? So these are all challenges for telecom operators. So it's not just cable operators that have challenges, and I think for those that have DSL, it's even greater. So speaking of the, improving your DOCSIS network and speeds, here's a story about how GCI in Alaska is laying the foundation for DOCSIS 4.0 and 10G. So DOCSIS 4.0 is the latest DOCSIS standard. It's really kind of a compilation of several existing technologies and a couple of fairly new technologies to get cable speeds up to, they say 10 gigabits per second symmetrical. Whether that ever happens remains to be seen. But there's lots that cable operators can do, and GCI is doing this. And this is an Alaska operator that's doing some pretty remarkable things here in a very difficult territory. But Alaska is urban as well as rural, so they're obviously focusing first on areas where they can make these changes easier. GCI Alaska's largest cable operator, is well down the path of preparing its networks for 10G, an overarching industry initiative focused on symmetrical 10 gig speeds. low latency, and enhanced security. GCI's playbook for 10G will take a multi-pronged approach as it deploys fiber to the premises networks, largely in greenfields, and makes a wide range of enhancements and upgrades to its broadly deployed hybrid fiber coax or HFC network. So that's the same tactic that a lot of providers are doing, is they're looking at greenfield areas and going directly fiber to the home. But for their existing areas, they're going to be upgrading their cable plant to get better speeds and try to rely on that cable plant as long as they can. And some are saying that, you know, it's going to go out maybe 30 years before there's a lot of significant overbuilding that takes place on existing HFC plants. Meanwhile, GCI has already gotten aggressive with an enhancement of its DOCSIS 3.1 network that pumps out 2 gigabits downstream and 75 megabits in the upstream. So you can see it's not nearly symmetrical, but honestly, 2 gigs is way more than most people need on the downstream, and 75 megabits per second is generally plenty for people on the upstream. So symmetrical service, you know, like people say 1 gig symmetrical service, symmetrical is really, it's a marketing thing. Yeah, people need more upstream. We determined that with the pandemic as we had more conference calls going on. You know, you had Zoom calls, you know, kids and parents at the same time working and doing school, and maybe somebody else, you know, maybe the little toddler streaming something on TV. So you had a lot going on. And, you know, streaming is mostly downstream, but, you know, had a lot going on as far as bandwidth during the pandemic. So we determined that we needed more upstream, but cable operators were generally able to adapt with that. Some of them did have to do some splits and some things to improve that, but they had plenty of upstream bandwidth. And Cable Labs looked at this and determined that you could have multiple, I think it was up to 20 kind of Zoom calls going on, even I think it was with 50 megabits per second. So it's not necessarily needed, the symmetrical service. It's really more of a marketing thing that fiber is really going to be pushing. Fiber operators can be pushing because it's something that they have over their cable competitors, because it's a lot harder for cable operators to do symmetrical service. So I think we won't really need to see symmetrical service for quite a while. Certainly at 1 gig by 1 gig, not really needed, but that's what everybody's shooting for because they want to be able to compete when you look at the check boxes on the ad, right? So in preparation for DOCSIS 4, a spec that will deliver multi-gig speeds on HFC, GCI is already pushing ahead with Distributed Access Architecture, or DAA, focused on the use of remote MAC-PHY, an approach that effectively moves the PHY layer and MAC processing of the cable modem termination system, or the CMTS, to the node. So remote MAC-PHY is like taking your CMTS, you know, your big piece of iron that you have in your head end that distributes cable modem service to lots and lots of people, is to basically get a smaller version of that and put it out in the field. So you go fiber deep out to the field to this remote CMTS, is pretty much how to describe it. And then from there, you serve a smaller number of customers with that remote MAC-PHY unit out there, but you get better, more reliable service because it's fiber further out there. You've got fewer customers on there. You can do that in steps. So it's a nice way to go. There's also remote PHY where you're not putting the MAC layer out there. So you've still got kind of a CMTS in the head end, but then you've got PHY units, RPDs out in the field. So there's 2 ways to do this DAA. They're doing remote MAC-PHY. And again, that moves the CMTS out to the node. Tied in, GCI is also in the midst of a network upgrade to 1.2 gigahertz, up from 1 gigahertz today, so they're already doing fairly high up there, by installing new passive devices that will support a future move to 1.8 gigahertz. So that's looking at an extended spectrum DOCSIS version that will help give them more spectrum, basically. That's one of the things that you can do with DOCSIS 4.0 in addition to full duplex, which is a little bit more complicated. When we come back around and do the 1.8 gigahertz upgrades, it's literally just a faceplate swap. Eric Kuhlman, Senior Director of Engineering and Architecture at GCI, said, "We're taking on a big program to provide remote MAC-PHY upgrades in all our nodes in Anchorage. The work begins this year and will go out to next year. It's a lot of work. In preparation, GCI is also moving forward to plan to shift to a high split that expands the amount of spectrum dedicated to the upstream, effectively expanding that range from 5 megahertz to 42 megahertz today, to a range of 5 megahertz to 204 megahertz down the road. GCI is also writing EPON for its targeted fiber to the premise deployment. So you see what they're doing here in their DOCSIS plant. Then they're also going to be doing in greenfield areas EPON to get fiber to the premise. We're going to make a choice in a greenfield. We might as well go to the most future-proofed, lowest operating and lowest cost solution, he said. So again, fiber is the best way to go if you're doing greenfield. There's no reason to extend your DOCSIS plant because you're going to be extending it fiber most of the way anyway. So you might as well go all the way to the curb. And then you don't have to worry about, when you're overbuilding, you got to worry about the CPE in the customer's home, and that last mile or last from the drop to the customer complicates things. So in greenfield, you don't worry about that. We're not just talking about brining communities, that would be those that brine. No, bringing communities like Anchorage's size, which is 200,000 plus people, but also communities much smaller than that. It's become part of our mission to try to close the digital divide between rural and urban Alaska. Those are big issues here in the state. And it's a big issue now, of course, at the federal level with the funding with the BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. That's what's in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that's, again, money that's going to be probably slated to go out in grants sometime in 2023. And Alaska is a significant challenge. Now, again, if they're in an urban area, it's not as difficult. It's closer to what you'd find in other urban areas. But out in rural areas, you've got very few people. Number one, you've got difficult terrain. So all these people spread out in this huge state. So one of the things that Alaska is going to be looking to do through these infrastructure dollars is getting a lot of that money and applying it toward middle mile infrastructure. Because you need good middle mile infrastructure to be able to get out to all these remote areas and have the last mile connection. So they're going to be taking a lot of the money from BEAD and other federal programs and probably applying that to middle mile. And then with that, they can help get some of the last mile infrastructure put in. Kissing QAM video goodbye, and I've mentioned this before, this is something that operators have said is the most important thing for them to do to be able to get higher speeds. So shifting back to the high split, GCI will open up access to more capacity in that portion of the spectrum by shutting down its legacy QAM video platform and pivoting customers to its relatively new IP and app-based Yukon TV service. According to the Yukon TV FAQ, GCI intends to shut down its legacy QAM video service by April 30th, 2022, so this month, for customers living in Anchorage, Mat-Su, Girdwood, and Eagle River, with similar shutdowns to follow in other GCI markets. That will help build in the capacity we need for the high split, Coleman said. Spectrum reclamation benefits aside, Chapados said the move to IPTV amounts to a paradigm shift and a major undertaking for GCI. We're moving from a traditional legacy linear delivery of video to essentially a streaming model, he said. Yukon TV currently supports several TV streaming platforms, mentions Apple, Amazon, Android, Google TV, that have access to a range of pay TV packages and a cloud DVR. So I don't know if they're planning on doing their own IPTV service or just kind of bundling other services. So, that's one way to do it. Now, we offer actually a linear-based IPTV service that can give you the same benefits. So if you get our IPTV service, we do everything, basically. You need a little bit of equipment at your end, but we provide the programming, we help you get it all set up. And then again, if you do that and you get off your QAM-based video, then you can reclaim all that spectrum and use that for broadband. And that is the way that things are going. So they are doing that. They're certainly getting the spectrum back. And again, I don't know if this is their own linear TV offering plus some streaming services that they're providing access to or not. But that's a big thing. Like I say, that right now is something that a lot of operators are doing, is getting off QAM-based video and going to an IPTV offering. And that allows you to also keep revenue from video customers. So you could get off it completely and say, I'm just getting out of video, but then you lose all that revenue. So nobody wants to do that. Comcast Supersonic Wi-Fi taps Wi-Fi 6E for speeds exceeding a gigabit. So this is important. If you're going to start providing gigabit service, symmetrical service especially, then you need better Wi-Fi in the home, or that's going to be the impacting thing that you have in the home. So here it says here, Comcast is calling its new Wi-Fi 6E gateway Supersonic Wi-Fi. The company cites speeds exceeding 1 gig for the offering, which is available for Xfinity Internet Gigabit and ultra-fast customers. Comcast Internet Gigabit service offers speeds up to 1.2 gigs downstream, and the company's ultra-fast service supports speeds up to 600 megabits per second downstream. Company notes in today's press release that it envisions offering symmetrical gigabit service in the future. So again, they're going to be doing that. In addition to any greenfield fiber deployments that they do, they're going to be doing that through DOCSIS 4.0 and 10G, and they are going to be deploying full duplex DOCSIS. So that's another kind of path on the 10G, or another segment or branch on the 10G path to DOCSIS 4.0, where some, again, are doing extended spectrum DOCSIS, like we were talking about. They're doing in Alaska with the 1.8 gigahertz on the upper end, and then Comcast is doing full duplex, which does give you symmetrical speeds. And again, if they do everything else, like the remote distributed access architecture, and they do that, and they do coherent optics and some other things that are involved in DOCSIS 10G, DOCSIS 4.0, then they hope to meet this symmetrical service of 1 gig down and 1 gig up. Multi-gigabit service needs fast Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is a hot area these days, because really, if you think about it, that's what people have in their home, and that's what they notice when the internet's not working generally. I mean, your internet can go down, but a lot of times if you're noticing some issues, it could be congestion in your Wi-Fi network, or you're too far away from your Wi-Fi router, or maybe you need some extenders, those kinds of things. So as broadband providers roll out service supporting speeds exceeding 1 gig, the Wi-Fi gateway can become a connectivity bottleneck. So if you got 1 gig in the house and you don't have good Wi-Fi service, you're not going to see the 1 gig. Offering Wi-Fi 6E gateways would appear to be even more critical for fiber broadband providers such as AT&T, Verizon, and Frontier that are offering multi-gigabit speeds as high as 5 gig symmetrical. And talks about some of the other features here. So Wi-Fi 6E, in addition to having these fast speeds, it has some congestion, some things that can mitigate congestion and contention with other users in the home or other nearby networks. So this is going to be needed for these fast connections if you're going to be doing Wi-Fi in the home. French court says no to Starlink. So Starlink is a low Earth orbit offering from SpaceX, so Elon Musk's company that has a constellation of satellites already up in the air, already providing service. And they're trying to get the service in France, and France said no. Starlink, SpaceX's budding satellite broadband service, has just received a setback in France that may dent its ambition to become a global provider of broadband services using a mesh of thousands of low Earth orbit satellites. France's highest administrative court, the Conseil d'État, maybe, has essentially stripped Starlink of its license to operate in 2 frequency bands in the country, reversing a decision made by French telecoms regulator ARCEP in February 2021. So the courts reversed something. Originally, they said they could deploy there. Well, it's already deployed, provide service there. It seems that because the decision to grant the licenses to Starlink could impact the market of access to high bandwidth internet and affect interests of end users, ARCEP should have consulted the public in advance, the court said. I'm not sure what they're saying there. It could be, it could be that they have a concern about what others have about Starlink here in the United States. And here in the United States, the concern is that Starlink, who already has supposedly won lots of auctions as far as RDOF goes, as far as providing broadband to unserved areas, they've not been granted those dollars yet, because there's a concern that if they get that money, then that will lock out others that could provide better broadband options, such as fiber, or maybe even 5G wireless service. So maybe that's the concern here, is that if Starlink gets in there, that others, might not deploy broadband service in the country, in France, in areas like maybe more, they won't deploy fiber in certain areas, or 5G. I don't know. I don't know how that, maybe that's what it is. Here in the United States, it's more about whether Starlink gets funded. There, it sounds like it's just another competitor. So I don't know. Starlink has been authorized to use the frequencies, 10.95, well, it shows the frequencies here, for space to Earth and Earth to space transmissions. And I never thought about this, that, Starlink, wherever they go and they're going to deploy, they need to get authorization to use these frequencies wherever they are. So I guess France, this is the leverage that they have over them, is they said, no, you can't use these frequencies. News has certainly been mixed for Starlink, which recently revealed that it had surpassed 250,000 subscribers. It gained some kudos for reconnecting areas of Ukraine in collaboration with Vodafone Ukraine, and also apparently helped Tonga restore internet connectivity after the eruption of an undersea volcano broke its only international fiber optic link on January 15th. So you can see the real value or benefit of something like Starlink to quickly to be able to get internet somewhere. They've already got the satellites up there, so it's not like they have to go lay infrastructure to provide internet. If they've got a constellation circling the Earth, then all they need to do is send somebody a terminal, one of those little UFOs on a stick. It's got the satellite dish, and that person can get internet, and they can get fast internet, generally over 100 megabits per second and around 20 megabits per, that's down, and around 20 megabits per second up, and latency of only like, I think, as low as 20 to 30 milliseconds they've seen. So this is really good broadband service. It's not cheap. It's about $100 per month, and the equipment's expensive. But if you're in an area that can't get broadband, or you have a situation like this where suddenly you've got some kind of a natural disaster, or man-made disaster in the case of Ukraine, then this is a way to get internet deployed very, very quickly. So France needs to keep that in mind, that if they ever have an issue, they might be going back to Starlink and saying, help. So who knows where this is going to go. But Starlink has got a competitor kind of on its heels. They're quite a few years behind them, but Amazon is looking to compete. You've got Amazon, you've got the two billionaires going after each other here. So you've got Amazon Project Kuiper books 83 launches of internet satellites. So they've now booked some companies to put their satellites into space. Amazon hired Arianespace, Blue Origin, and United Launch Alliance to provide up to 83 launches over 5 years for its Project Kuiper initiative to boost broadband service from a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. And I talked about a few weeks ago about OneWeb. OneWeb had a launch of their satellites. They already have some satellites in space, and they were launching some more, but they were scheduled to go off on a Soyuz rocket. I think it was Arianespace that has been using Soyuz rockets, and it did not go. Russia said you can't use those. They wanted the UK to say that to renounce any ownership of the company, and the UK said no. So they're making other plans. OneWeb is making other plans. So that's another satellite competitor. And interestingly enough, SpaceX, Starlink's kind of parent, so to speak, are the ones that OneWeb is going to use to launch their satellites. So they are going to SpaceX to launch their satellites, even though SpaceX has the competing service in Starlink. Let's see. So notably missing from the launch group is Amazon's direct satellite competitor, SpaceX, and its Starlink constellation for internet access. Amazon's announced launches will deploy the majority of Project Kuiper's 3,236 satellites, Amazon said in a statement. So OneWeb felt okay going to Starlink, or I should say SpaceX, but Amazon did not. Now OneWeb thinks of themselves not so much as a competitor of Starlink, because Starlink is very consumer-oriented. They're going after individual subscribers who are in hard-to-reach places. OneWeb is supposedly more about providing, backbone connectivity over long distances via the satellite. And I think Amazon is going to be more subscriber-oriented, so they are probably a more competitively aligned against Starlink. It's also interesting here, it mentions they're going to have 3,236 satellites. OneWeb's going to supposedly have fewer than that in the ongoing. I think it was maybe like 600, because their satellites are further away. Amazon must be somewhere in the middle, because Starlink is supposed to have, Starlinks are the closest, and they're supposed to try to get up to 30,000 plus satellites. So depending on how close you are to the Earth, you're going to need more satellites the closer you are. Fewer satellites the further away you are. Your latency is going to be better the closer you are, although it's really not that much worse for somebody like Amazon or like OneWeb if they're further out in space, because it's a vacuum and things travel pretty quickly. Where you have the latency issue is when you've got the geosynchronous satellites that are like 30,000 feet or 30,000 miles up in the air, as opposed to 200 miles or 400 miles, 800 miles or whatever. So that's where you have some latency issues, where you could have latencies like 400 milliseconds versus maybe 40 milliseconds. So. Amazon claimed its purchase of launch services from multiple providers will reduce risk in launches and provide cost savings that can be passed on to the consumers. Heavy lift rockets are being used to deploy more satellites with fewer launches. So they have fewer satellites to put up than, let's say, Starlink, and they're going to be probably deploying more at a time. 2 prototype missions for Project Kuiper are planned for later this year on ABL Space Systems RSI rocket. More than 1,000 people at Amazon work on Project Kuiper, so this is a significant undertaking for them. Amazon did not disclose the cost of the launches, but various reports put the tally at $10 billion. Analysts also estimate Amazon's Project Kuiper is about 4 years behind the SpaceX Starlink constellation. So again, they've got to make up some distance here if they're going to compete. And a couple of stories about USF, Universal Service Fund, to close out today. So Ntca worries cuts to USF support could chill rural broadband investment. So the Universal Service Fund was meant to provide support for telephone companies to be able to provide telephone service to their rural customers, and then it has been trying to make a transition to broadband, but it's still being funded by telephone lines, land telephone lines. So there need to be some changes made. And it says here the Ntca, that's the National Telecommunications Association, I think. The Rural Broadband Association urged the Federal Communications Commission to waive scheduled cuts to USF support for rural operators, arguing a reduction in financial assistance could force them to raise rates for consumers or halt planned network investments. The organization's concern relates to the Connect America Fund broadband loop support and high-cost loop support programs. So Connect America Fund is, again, providing broadband to these hard-to-reach areas, and you've got this high-cost loop support program as well. Both are targeted at smaller operators and are designed to make the economics of deploying and providing broadband service in rural areas more sustainable. Unlike other USF programs, these provide reimbursement for costs already incurred rather than advances for future costs. So when you get when you're providing service to a rural broadband area, it's more expensive to install, but it's also more expensive to maintain. If you've only got a customer every couple of miles or every 50 miles, whatever it is, however rural it is, then you've got to maintain that, which means you've got longer truck rolls, you've got more facility out there supporting much fewer customers, so you're not getting as much revenue from these subscribers. So it's very expensive both to install, but as well to maintain. Last June, the Commission waived a scheduled 8.6 reduction in support that was due to take effect in July on the grounds that such a move could further strain rural operators pushing to meet increased demand for broadband services in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ntca wants the FCC to do the same for a cut set to take effect on July 1st. The reduction amount for this year is yet to be announced, but is likely to be even higher, he said. According to Romano, the same conditions that were the basis for the waiver in 2021 are still present, and a reduction in funding would fly in the face of broader government messaging around the importance of broadband connectivity. The practical effects of a drop in support could include headcount reductions, a slowdown of suspension of new broadband investments, or an increase in rates for consumers, Romano said. The problem it presents is the network's already in the ground. You're already delivering services, so you're going to have to look to recover those costs some other way, he explained. The kinds of things we typically hear from people are either I'm going to leave positions unfilled that I don't have filled now, I may have to reduce headcount depending on how significant the cuts are, or I'm not going to choose to invest moving forward. I was going to do more investment, but now I can't because I can't depend upon the revenues I thought were going to come in to help me do that. And he says, obviously having waivers required every year is not a really sustainable prospect. There's probably a better way to manage and design the system, he concluded. Let's have a holistic discussion about what should be the new service level commitments going forward, given we have to talk about that next year anyway, and what is the budget that's needed to achieve those service level commitments. And this is all taking effect because of this reduction. Was it in here? There's something, there's like an automatic budget control mechanism that reduces the monthly per line amount, and that was what was waived in June, and they're wanting to waive that again here. He's saying you need a more permanent solution, and that's true. And that's something that's being looked at. And one of the things that's been mentioned for USF is to make streamers pay, because again, it's very expensive in rural areas, and it's very expensive in rural areas with all of the streaming that's going on. So again, if you have fewer customers paying into the maintenance of that network, as well as things like bandwidth use, then it's very, very expensive. So some people are saying that streamers should pay, that they're kind of getting a free ride on the broadband circuits of all of these operators, and they're not paying anything in the USF, and they're not paying the operators anything to use that network. So it says here OTT, or over-the-top video, that's what they're talking about. OTT to FCC, USF streaming fee would be impossible to administer. So this is the OTT folks fighting back, kind of the lobbies for them, fighting back and saying, no, this would be a bad idea to make streamers pay toward the USF fee. And by the way, the USF fee is that junk fee on your phone bill, you know, $4, $5, whatever it is, that you have to pay. And that, again, goes towards mostly today funding broadband deployments and things like that in rural areas. But again, also to these local phone companies. And mostly what they're doing is providing broadband now as opposed to phone service. Streaming content providers are telling the FCC it would be unwise and unworkable for Congress to expand the broadband subsidy base to include over-the-top video and others in the vague big tech basket. That could be Google, Facebook, others in the vague big tech basket, and essentially impossible for the FCC to administer. Currently, the USF subsidies are levied on telecom services, not broadband, and that's a problem, right? So again, this is a fee on your fixed phone service, wireline phone service, that fewer and fewer people have. More and more people are getting broadband, but they don't have this fee on broadband. That seems to be the obvious thing that you would do, is have a USF fee on everybody's broadband service. Then you could take the price or the amount down quite a bit, because you've got far more broadband subscribers now than you've had in the past, and fewer telephone subscribers. But with traditional phone service waning, that contribution base is withering as well, leading some to suggest that online behemoths, whatever, be brought into the subsidy fold. Since those telecom subsidies are passed on to subs on monthly bills, levying them on streamers would almost certainly raise the OTT video price to consumers. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to put that on the streaming service, it's going to raise the price. It's the same for broadband. If you're going to put that on the broadband service, it's going to raise the price. So everybody that's got a phone line now will see a reduction in their USF, but it's got to go somewhere. So it could go either on the broadband providers or on the streamers or on both, I guess, if they did it both ways. MPA, that's the Motion Picture Association, counted the ways in which getting Congress to expand contributions to broadband content providers, including streamers, was a non-starter, saying that it would exceed the Commission's authority, which is true now, be inadvisable as a matter of policy, and present significant implementation issues that would render such an approach unworkable. Now, the FCC may take control over streaming. A lot of people want the FCC to have more regulatory control over streaming like they do over broadcast TV today. NPA represents streaming content players like Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, ESPN+, Peacock, Paramount+, Crunchyroll, and HBO Max. They told the FCC that suggestions that streamers disproportionately get the benefits of broadband deployment while paying nothing to support broadband nets or networks is false. That's not true. That is not false, I should say. For one thing, and these are not great reasons. For one thing, they argued that they have been investing billions to develop programming that is highly valued by consumers, and broadband build-outs allow those users to get even more value from their broadband service dollar. That's not really relevant. Then there are the investments in content delivery networks to help alleviate traffic issues, and in versatile video encoding and variable bit rates to make data transfers more efficient. So what they're saying is, hey, you know, we're providing really great content for all these broadband customers, so therefore we are providing some value to them, and we're trying to do our best to reduce the amount of traffic that we're sending over those networks. But part of that is for their own benefit, right? Because they want things to be able to stream faster, and they can do that if they have these content delivery networks and they have this better video encoding. That's really their benefit as well. So they're basically saying, we're going to use your bandwidth more efficiently rather than paying you for it. They also say that from a policy perspective, targeting specific uses of broadband, say streaming rather than telehealth or IoT applications, does not make sense because it could hinder or favor a particular use. And that's true. So, you know, can you just say, okay, you streamers are the ones who are going to make pay for this and not all these other content providers, whatever they might happen to be. And again, things like Facebook, just regular YouTube videos, telehealth kinds of things, Zoom, whatever, you know, people that are using bandwidth, you know, you can make everybody pay into it. So they have a point there. So I don't expect that streamers will be hit with this. I think where it's going to wind up going is the broadband providers are going to be the ones that are going to have to add something to the bill. You know, and that could be, you know, that could be a telephone company today that's putting on the phone bill, but they're just going to shift that over to the broadband section of that bill where they're providing their DSL or their fiber service. For a cable operator, they're going to have to put that on the bill and start paying towards this, because that's really, you know, these funds are supposed to, these USF funds are supposed to fund broadband deployment and operating broadband networks in areas that are high cost, and to be trying to fund that through phone line revenue doesn't make any sense. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully this was helpful. If so, you can click the little thumbs up on YouTube and give me a like there. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, click the little subscribe button down below the video, or there should be, where is it? Over here somewhere, down in the bottom corner actually of this video, there may be a little subscribe button. You click that and subscribe. Make sure you click the little bell. If you subscribe, you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks again, and I will see you tomorrow for broadband deployment news. Bye-bye.